So, Emily, welcome back to Informed Choice Radio. For people who didn't catch your previous appearance with us, perhaps you could start by just telling us a bit about you. So, introduce yourself, tell us who you are and what you do.
Yeah, hi Martin, thanks for having me again. So I'm Emily Taylor, solicitor and partner at BDB Pitmans. I'm based in our Southampton office. Our firm has offices in Southampton, London, Reading and Cambridge. And I specialise in all private wealth matters, so wills, lasting powers of attorney, tax planning, probate work.
Fab. And we're talking today about lasting powers of attorney. And I'll come on to the reason we're having this conversation in just a moment. But perhaps you could tell us what a lasting power of attorney is, because for some listeners, for some viewers, that might just sound like legalistic jargon. So what is an LPA?
Yeah, and I'll try not to go into the legalistic jargon because our solicitors are very well known for doing that. So a lasting power of attorney is a way of giving someone you trust, so your attorney or attorneys, the legal authority to make decisions on your behalf if you lose capacity. There are two types. So there's one in relation to your property and financial affairs and one in relation to your health and welfare. With a lasting power of attorney for property and financial affairs, your attorneys can make decisions such as paying your tax and bills, managing your bank accounts, dealing with your property, investments, pensions and benefits, for example. This type of power of attorney can be used if you lose capacity, or if you wish, it can be used if you still have capacity, but with your consent. So I've had some clients who, for example, mentally they're okay, but they might be in hospital for a long time and they need somebody to manage their affairs for them. So they give their consent. There's also the health and welfare power of attorney, which allows your attorneys to make decisions about your general health and welfare. So, for example, your daily routine, such as washing, dressing or eating, medical care, and where you're going to live. The lasting power of attorney for health and welfare will include an option. So if you'd like your attorneys to give or refuse consent to life-sustaining treatment, you can sign a relevant option and your attorneys can speak to your doctors on your behalf if they were you. With the health and welfare power of attorney, it can only be used if you lose capacity to make these decisions, because obviously if you can make those decisions, you'll be able to make them yourself.
No, absolutely. And you use that term capacity. That's probably quite an important one for us to define and expand upon a little bit. This is about decision-making ability, really, isn't it? And I know under the law, there's a presumption that we have capacity unless it can be proven otherwise. So perhaps expand a bit on that term.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. So it's always a difficult one with capacity as well, because also some people might go in and out of capacity. So some conditions may mean that they lose capacity for a time, but then they're okay. But the main thing is really your attorneys have a duty to act and have authority to act on your behalf if you can't make the decision yourself. So your attorneys have to always check to see if you can make that decision. And if you can't make that decision, then they will make that on your behalf. Often in these situations, obviously, you'd need a medical practitioner to confirm capacity. And, I have seen those situations where the person has lost capacity to manage their affairs, but then they have gained capacity again. And the attorneys need to be really, really cautious in those cases and make sure that they can only make that decision if it's established that the person can't make the decision themselves.
And losing capacity, sadly, is something that can happen to any of us at any time. I think when we think about planning for the future and we think about the legal aspects, our minds instantly go to wills and what happens if we die. But actually, what happens if we lose capacity can be just as significant from a legal perspective and from a financial perspective. So the reason that prompted this conversation we're having today is a documentary that recently shown on ITV about the journalist and presenter Kate Garraway, and it was called Finding Derek, about the experience she'd had with her husband. So tell us a bit about what she went through and why that sort of reminds us of the importance to put an LPA in place.
Yeah, it's a really sad story, Kate's husband's story, but unfortunately it's far too common. It's a real example of how you can lose capacity at any age. So in my experience, most clients making lasting powers of attorney would be a certain age. and expect capacity loss to be something that is maybe relatively slow. I mean, I have clients often say to me, "Oh, Emily, I'll make a power of attorney when I know I'm losing capacity." But obviously, sometimes it can be something very sudden. And Kate's husband's story has really shown that. And it's shown that capacity can be lost at any age. You know, if you do not make a power of attorney, then similar to Kate's situation, your loved ones are unable to make decisions on your behalf, quite frankly. And you can leave a complete mess behind. So it is a really, really sad story. And unfortunately, it's far too common, and even more common now with the current pandemic.
Yeah, and you mentioned the pandemic. This particular example, Kate Garraway's husband Derek, it was due to COVID that he lost capacity. And do you think the experience of the pandemic in the past sort of 14, 15 months or so has focused people's minds on losing capacity, or have we just immediately thought about the other consequence of it, which has been dying?
No, definitely. Clients have definitely been more keen to make lasting powers of attorney. Those that have heard Kate Garraway's story or have heard other stories, you know, where the pandemic has caused someone to be in hospital or on a ventilator for a long time and they can't make decisions themselves. So I've definitely seen an influx. But it's, you know, it's such a sad story. She was really quite vocal about the problems that she faced. He contracted COVID-19 in March last year, and she said most of the bills and insurance policies were in his name. And I think what really surprises people is, despite her being his wife, you know, spouse, she still couldn't access his accounts or deal with his affairs. Apparently, she had said that the car was in his name, the insurance was in his name, all the bank accounts were in his name. And she said she was quite surprised that even though she was his spouse, she couldn't manage his affairs or access the accounts. And you can imagine her and the family probably going through the most traumatic time of their lives. And the last thing they needed was to be finding that they couldn't manage his affairs and pay for usual bills, etc., household bills, for example.
What happens in that scenario where you lose capacity without an LPA being in place first? There is an alternative, isn't there? I know it's not a simple alternative.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So if you don't have a power of attorney and you lose capacity, then it's too late. So that's one thing to remember. Again, clients say to me, you know, I'll wait until the time comes, but how do you know that time has come? And also, if you have lost capacity, then you can't make one. The only option is a deputyship order. So an interested party will apply to the Court of Protection for a deputyship order. But that is very expensive and very lengthy as well. It takes a long time. So what's happening in the meantime? How are these bills being paid, etc.? The other thing is by then you've lost capacity, so you have no choice of who your deputy is. It's not your decision. It's normally a loved one that applies for the deputyship order, but the court ultimately makes the decision, and you have no control over that. Once the deputyship order is in place as well, the deputy has to submit annual reports to the court, and it's really time consuming and it's more expensive. I think I said last time we met, Martin, I mentioned about I act as a court appointed deputy. And whilst I'm more than happy to do that, you can imagine having a professional deputy act. You know, there are financial implications, and it may not always be what the person that lost capacity wanted. So, you know, having your affairs, making sure your affairs are in place and making lasting power of attorney will give you control over who acts on your behalf should you no longer be able to do so yourself.
And I'm assuming that registering an LPA that's already in place is a much faster process than applying to the court for a deputyship.
Yes, absolutely. So you make the lasting power of attorney, and it's signed. You have to have a certificate provider sign the power of attorney, and that's normally a professional, so solicitor who specialises in this area, or a medical practitioner, or it can be someone that's known you for over 2 years. And then when it's prepared and signed by all parties, it's sent to the court or the Office of the Public Guardian, and it takes about 8 weeks to register the document. And then once it's registered, I mean, the plus side to doing it while you still have capacity, it's registered and hopefully nothing changes, and you might never need to use it, but at least it's there if it does need to be used. I do always see it as insuring your mind, really. It's really insurance policy. If something goes wrong, you have something in place to cover it.
Yeah, that's a really good way of looking at it. I know some people are quite nervous to sign an LPA and have one in place in case it's abused and used without their consent or in an inappropriate way. But there are some safeguards in place, aren't there? You can add somebody to notify once it gets registered.
You can. So again, the good thing about making it is you have control over who your attorneys are, and you are giving them a wide power. So you really do need to make sure you trust them, and you are giving them a wide power should you lose capacity. But also you can include persons to be told, and they're informed when the lasting power of attorney is registered. And they're not an attorney, but they are there in the background. So should for any reason look like the power of attorney is being abused, they can, or any other person can, contact the Office of the Public Guardian and let them know. So there are measures in place to make sure you're protected. But the main thing is really you need to make sure that those attorneys are somebody that you trust to manage your affairs, whether that be financial or medical.
Is it a genuine concern that these LPAs are sometimes abused by attorneys and they sort of spend money inappropriately and things? I mean, do you see much with that, or is it just something that we probably fear more than actually takes place?
Unfortunately, in my career, I have seen the use of power of attorney, more the old types of powers of attorney. So they were called enduring powers of attorney, and they were really easily used. I mean, you didn't need a certificate provider to confirm capacity on those, so you just needed an independent witness to witness your signature. So unfortunately, in some situations, the person who had already lost capacity was signing it, and nobody really, although when that person lost capacity, they needed to be registered with the Office of the Public Guardian, and up to three or more family members are informed when it's being registered. You didn't have that, an independent person to be told who's necessarily informed. And unfortunately, they were abused a lot more, which is why lasting powers of attorney came into effect, to make sure more measures are put in place to prevent abuse. I haven't seen, there have been cases, but I haven't personally seen, fortunately, cases where a lasting power of attorney has been abused.
No, that's good to hear. So hopefully those sort of additional safeguard steps are improving that situation. And I mean, really, the risk is about weighing up, isn't it? The small chance of it being abused versus the massive hassle and inconvenience and stress that it would cause to your family if you don't have one and you lose capacity.
Yeah,
so it's about balancing those two.
Yeah, absolutely. I do have clients who do feel concerned about not necessarily not trusting their attorneys, but more of them signing it and thinking that they're signing everything over now. Especially my more elderly clients who have still got capacity, but sensibly them putting something in place should they no longer have capacity. And they often say, Emily, I feel that, am I passing everything over now? Because, I still want to have control over my affairs. And I always say, absolutely not. I mean, the difference is to note that the power of attorney for finance, property and financial affairs, if you do tick the relevant box to say I'm happy for it to be used with my consent as well, then it can be used with your consent, or if you lose capacity. But the person making it should really have control of that document afterwards. Right. I mean, as a firm, when we make it, we normally hold the original in our in a safe, but we would only ever release it if we have the consent of the donor or the person that's made it. Or if the attorneys contact us, which often happens, to say they've lost capacity, we would only ever release it with a medical certificate, so to confirm that they've lost capacity.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So there's that additional layer of safeguarding there as well, which is good. So someone listening to our conversation, or watching us on YouTube right now, thinking, okay, I've sorted my will out. Hopefully, as a result of hearing this, I must get an LPA in place. What are the steps? How do they go about that? Can they just go online and do it themselves, or do they need to come to someone like you and get professional help and guidance doing it?
Yeah, so there are a couple of options. So you would seek advice of a solicitor to make the power of attorney. As I said before, the certificate provider is normally, if the solicitor's doing it, then the solicitor would usually act as the certificate provider. But you can also go to the Gov.uk website and it will navigate you through making your own lasting power of attorney if you'd prefer to make it yourself. You can then find your own certificate provider. Just be careful, because if the correct box isn't ticked, then the form will be rejected and it can cause unnecessary delays. So, you know, the plus side to using a solicitor is we do these daily and we're used to them. And it's just, if you go through it, just make sure you navigate, take some time, because they're quite lengthy documents, and just take some time to go through it and make sure you're ticking the correct boxes and they are signed in the correct way.
Yeah, I'd absolutely support that. As someone who personally tried to do his own divorce paperwork many years ago and had it rejected by the court because I didn't read the instructions properly, it's definitely worth getting a professional involved who knows how to answer the questions, how to fill the forms in properly. It saves a lot of time, a lot of court fees and hassle, and yeah, worth doing. Emily, thank you so much for joining us again today. How can we find out more about the work you do and get in touch if we want to?
Yeah, if you get in touch, if you visit our website, www.bdbpitmans.com, if you want to search my name, Emily Taylor, there's some articles on there. My direct dial and my email address is on there, so feel free to email me, even if you just have any queries. If you want to look at any other documents online, the Gov.uk website's really helpful. Also Age UK, Citizens Advice Bureau, and also the NHS websites will also give you some more information about lasting powers of attorney.
Fab. We'll make sure we put links to your profile and those various resources as well in the show notes for this episode and in the description of the video. But Emily, thanks for taking the time to join us again today.
That's okay, Martin. Thanks for having me.